like to introduce Andrzej Robaczewski, who will be moderating the panel discussion, Routing Security, Fostering Continuous Improvement. Andrzej is with Global Cyber Alliance and has gathered some excellent panelists for today. So with that, let's welcome Andrzej. So please introduce your panelists and get the discussion started.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this introduction and welcome everyone. So we are going to talk about routing security. It's like, what? Routing security? Yes, it is still a problem, and there is recently quite some attention from different parts of the community, including the US government and other governments. So we are going to talk about this, but in this session we want to cover different aspects. We want to start with data and look at data trends, how we're doing in routing security. Then the session is called Fostering Continuous Improvement, and this is just to underpin the fact that security is not a state, it's a process, right? And we are never done. And people that think that they implement ROV and they're done, that's not true. We need to look forward and see what can be done to continue to be secure in terms of routing. And then we'll wrap up with a discussion about operational practices and looking into the future, what is the toolkit for network operators who want to keep their routing secure. But before we go into the substance, let me introduce a distinguished panel. We have 6 experts here on the panel. Let me introduce them in the order of their sitting, if you don't mind. So Alberto Danotti. Alberto is an associate professor and director of the Internet Intelligence Lab at Georgia Tech. He traveled from Atlanta, US to join us today. This is Alberto's 3rd time presenting at NANOC. His first talk at NANOC was at NANOC 66 at San Diego in 2016. It was about 48 hours after the first BGP hackathon. Thank you, Alberto. Next to him sits Doug Mardery. And Doug is the director of Internet Analysis for Cantic, where he works on Internet infrastructure analysis. Since joining Renesys as an analyst 15 years ago, he has written and spoken extensively on topics varying from Internet shutdowns, BGP mishaps, and submarine cables cuts and activations. Welcome, Doug. Tony Tauber. Tony has worked at Comcast for almost 20 years and in the industry for 30 years. Initially focused on backbone network design, he is the architect for Comcast routing security and RPKI deployment. He also engaged significantly with the research and policy communities on this and other topics. Welcome, Toby. Colleen McGrath. Colleen has been with Verizon for over 18 years and is in the industry for 25 years. She works in the network security organization where her current team's responsibilities include routing security and hygiene. She has experience in various aspects of wireless and transport network security, including DDoS mitigation and infrastructure protection. Welcome. Miles McCready is a peering coordinator for Metco, an ISP in the US Midwest with roughly 500,000 subscribers and 40 transit customers. Metco implemented RPKI ROV for transit, IX, and PNI BGP sessions in June of 2023. And last but not least, Nimrod Levy has been with AT&T for over 20 years and has worked on several aspects of AT&T network, including the Internet BGP control plane, DDoS routing, peering, and customer routing policies, and other edge security measures. Please welcome the panelists. Thank you. All right, and then without further ado, we have a very tight agenda here. Let me invite our first speaker, Doug, who will talk about trends in routing from the perspective of Cantic Intelligence Platform. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Great. Okay, so let's get right into it. So my name is Doug Midori. We're going to talk about routing security landscape from a perspective of data analysis on where we're at with things like RPKI ROV adoption. So maybe you've seen this already, but in case you haven't, we've reached a milestone this year, earlier this year in May, where the V4 routing table now has the majority of the routes that are in the global routing table have got ROAs and would be evaluated as valid. This graph on the left is from the NIST's RPKI Monitor website that has a lot of temporal graphics looking at trends through time. You can see these lines crossed. V6 actually crossed about a year ago, so that was already there. And one ongoing bit of analysis that I've been doing is taking that data and taking the large amount of net flow that we process at Kentic and look at, like, well, from our perspective, we have this slice of the traffic of the internet. What does it look like from our perspective? That these BGP routes, because as we all know, not every BGP route handles the same amount of traffic. Some handle very little at all. But when you convert this into traffic, you end up with even more favorable statistics. And so we just updated the stat, kind of approaching 3/4 in bits per second of internet traffic that crosses our infrastructure going to routes with ROAs, meaning that it would be eligible for the protection that ROV would offer. But creating ROAs is useless if nobody rejects invalids. So we have to understand what happens to RPKI invalid routes, and we would hope that these things wouldn't propagate very far, because if they don't propagate very far, they're less apt to cause disruption. So this was an analysis that we started. This is a collaboration between myself and Job Schneiders at Fastly. Going back a couple of years, we started looking at, like, all right, propagation. If you take the global routing table, so it's just using a dump from route views, and evaluate everything in the V4 and V6 table and look at how many BGP sources see each route, you end up with these spikes at globally routed. So you have, those are the routes that everybody's got and are not being filtered. And then those that are invalid are in the bottom in the green. They get pushed off to the left. And so the distribution is much lower. In fact, it's often 1/2 or less, just due to encountering one network or another that is rejecting invalids. But I think it's been a rule for a while that a RPKI invalid route cannot be globally routed anymore. That happened a while back. That's the system working. So then the question was, I presented a little bit about this at the last analog of just like, all right, well, we had that analysis from 2022. What's been happening in the last couple of years here? Can we see a trend? I took those little green populations, green distributions that were in the previous slide, and if you look at them through time, they are kind of drifting even farther to the left side, meaning there's fewer ASs that can see those invalid routes. One tricky thing is that population is constantly changing. You're not guaranteed to have the same amount of the same invalids from one month to the other. And then, so it's a little tricky. So then we were like, all right, well, let's validate that by looking at these beacons. These are intentionally routed for measurement purposes, for stuff like what we were doing here, of looking at RIPE has a V4 and V6 beacons that are valid and invalid for measurement purposes. Job has his own, not to be outdone. He's got his own, because he is who he is. He's got his own beacons that he operates. And in each case, they kind of all tell a similar story, where the valid routes are all along the top. They're kind of slowly increasing, mostly due to the data set of, this is based on route views data, that route views is slowly growing over time. And then at the same time that the data set is growing, the number of ASs that can see these invalid routes is going down. So again, this is, we want to see invalid routes not being propagated. Those are that's how we'll limit the disruption due to the types of mishaps that ROV is meant to address. And then we had another milestone here where Zio started rejecting invalids earlier this year. So depending on your definition of who's in the club, in the TFZ club, we may be just down to one global telecom that isn't rejecting invalids for their customer cone. And there's a lot of downstream benefits to the internet, because this is how these leaks propagate through the internet. If they're hitting these tier ones that are rejecting, then it keeps these propagations low. And I think we're we may not appreciate it, but I think we're benefiting from this. So, this year, another thing, so the last couple of years, the federal government has gotten interested in routing security. This year, they published this proposal requesting comment. I'm sure they got lots of feedback on this of if they were to require 9 ISPs to deploy RPROV, here's what it would look like. And they had some requirements like it had to be 90% of the routes under control, which isn't, maybe it's been defined more since then. That, I think a lot of us could debate what that maybe means, and then rejecting invalids at interconnection points. So I took that and I said, well, let's look at this from, if we look at these 9 providers, and I did a best effort based on, the limited definition of terms in the documentation to try to say all right, well, here's where they would stand right now. So you have 6 out of the 9 already have 90% of the routes that they originate from the ASs that are under control already have ROAs. But like I always do with these routing things, the document says we should use some sort of risk management approaches to try to focus on where's the risk. And again, to me, that I put that in terms of traffic. We want to look at well, let's secure the things that are pushing the most traffic. And so I've got our data to bring to bear. And so then we were all right, well, if we ran that same 9 and looked at traffic, some of these are a lot more favorable as far as the volume in bits per second traffic going into these networks that have ROAs. Some of these providers would have already met the requirement if it were to be published as it stands. And we've got somebody has some catch up to do. But I published this originally in July, just after they put this out. Nanog published it. We republished it in August. And I got a very nice email from Colleen who was like, I think you need to run your numbers again because Verizon's might be better than what they published. So I went back and looked, and sure enough, there have been between the time I first published the analysis and then got a nice email from Colleen to go check the data again. You can see that this is Verizon Wireless, 6167. You can see there's these 4 steps going down as the traffic is shifting from going to routes that are unknown, no ROA, to getting to 100%. And so they, just this summer is another, milestone of RPKI ROV deployment. Verizon Wireless is now at 100%. So let's see. So the last thought, we got cut off here, and you can just imagine the animation going. So it's a classic security metrics challenge. If we think it seems like we're kind of doing better. I make the comment of the last really debilitating routing leak was maybe 5.5 years ago, and that's in internet time a really long time. So why is that? I think there's some reasons, but it makes it challenging to measure. Actually, Alberto's got some data on this better than I can, but I can just leave you with a couple of ideas that routing leaks are still occurring with regularity. So I do some collaboration with the guys at Curator. They're kind of BGP nerds like I am, and there's stuff happening on a regular basis. And I'm going to guess probably nobody knows about any of these incidents because they end up getting contained for the most part to the areas where they're originating, and that is the system working. Whether it's RPKI ROV, there may be other mechanisms like peer lock and just IR-based filtering that's keeping these errant routes from disrupting other things on the internet. But we know these leaks, these errors are going to continue into perpetuity. But we just want to limit the impacts, and that's I feel like we're arriving at that kind of thing here. There was I don't have time for these last couple examples here, but there was Brazil tried to block Twitter. They had leaked BGP routes, but in the end, it didn't cause any disruption to Twitter because the only routes that ended up making it outside of Brazil were those without ROAs. Those with that were more crucial got filtered. And let's see. I'll just end with some formatting issues here, but I would just say that we've made a lot of progress. RPKI ROV is not a silver bullet, though. We've got more space that is unsolved. We call this the determined adversary scenario, where someone is smart enough to get around the security mechanisms that we've deployed, and that's best characterized by these cryptocurrency attacks that we've seen in recent years. But hopefully we can build off the success of RPKI ROV and deal with these other more gnarly issues. All right, that's it.
Thank you. While Alberto is preparing for his talk, I'll ask you to hold your questions till the end of the session, so please record it somewhere, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Should we press play? Oh, here we go. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So the observations that I want to share with you today are based on data from a platform that is called GRIP, that we operate at Georgia Tech, that you can reach at the short URL bgp.live. So I want to start with a question for the audience. How many of you, raise your hand, ever heard about this platform, are familiar with? Well, actually, there are a few, and I expect the people from the panel as well. Okay, thanks. Then the second question is, how many of you are familiar with the Manners Observatory then? All right, definitely way more people, right? So some of you might not know, actually, that a large fraction of the BGP incidents reported by the Manners Observatory are based on data provided by GRIP. GRIP stands for Global Routing Intelligence Platform, is a BGP incident detection and monitoring system. And as I represented here in this stack diagram, it literally stands on the shoulders of giants like RouteViews and the RIPRIS project. So thanks also to all of you who share data and support RouteViews and RIPRIS. I started this project in 2014. It became operational in 2018. Since then, we've been running it and slowly making improvements to our inferences. But today, I want to provide you with a sneak peek at some freshly baked data. Specifically, what we did, we reprocessed data from the last 5 years, starting from 2019. But we used the latest version of our inference and classification methods, and we reapplied them to the last 5 years with the goal to uncover some trends, finding some trends in routing incidents as they happen on the internet based on this large corpus of data. Before I show you the data, I just want to help you to interpret what I will show you, but just giving you one bit of information of context about how GRIP operates, about its approach. We target incidents that are misoriginations or all kinds of BGP hijacking events. These type of incidents generate events at the BGP level, such as MOAS prefixes originated by more than one AES, or the equivalent for a prefix and a subprefix. We casually, or less casually at this point, it's becoming a keyword, call them sub-MOAS, or the appearance of an AES link in the AES topology. And what GRIP does, it detects these events, and then it tries to classify them into legitimate events or incidents, and then classifies these incidents into subcategories. And specifically for this presentation, I will refer only to potential misorigination events, so events that are based on MOAS and sub-MOAS BGP events. So when we dig into the data, the first good news is that, thankfully, GRIP classifies 85% of all these events as legitimate. And we're talking about order of magnitude of 300,000 events per year. The remaining 15% are incidents, and actually 2/3 of them exhibit patterns that are compatible with misconfigurations, so 10%, right? When we talk about misconfigurations, we're talking about fat finger of prefixes, of autonomous system numbers, path prepending gone wrong. Actually, I have a few more slides about this in a couple of minutes, or RPKI misconfigurations of AESs that are evidently related. A remaining 2% are events that exhibit patterns that are compatible with attacks, but in reality, and this is an important point, they could be misconfigurations that are just harder to classify, like RPKI misconfigs, RPKI invalids, and we don't have any hints that suggest that DASs are actually authorized to originate those prefixes. And finally, 2% of events that we call unexplained, because we cannot find, so far, we haven't been able to find any indication, we call them tags, that can provide hints about the nature of these events. Now, these statistics that I just briefly showed you, remember we looked at data from 2019 to 2023. We're also in the process of crunching 2024. They don't change dramatically across the years. However, when we start looking at them at a monthly granularity, and we look at them in terms of absolute numbers, we start seeing some interesting trends, and this is something that I wanted to show you. Again, take them with a grain of salt. These are preliminary results. We're working on a paper where we will explain the methodology. We'll show all the results. But the first good news is actually that over these 5 years, we've seen misconfigurations actually declining substantially. So this is good. The line that you see at the bottom instead is actually the sum of the 2% of attacks that I was discussing earlier and the 2% of unexplained events that could be still attacks. And as you see, their number has been steady over the years. However, if we break this line into these two subcategories, attacks and unexplained, then things are actually quite interesting. And so as you see, there are two actually opposite trends. So the events that we are not able to explain at all have actually been decreasing over these 5 years, and the events that we classify as potentially attacks have been increasing. So events basically that normally tend to fall in the bucket of unexplained gradually started falling into the bucket of explainable. Or at least we have some indicators. And actually we dug down in the data and we found that the main reason is because there are RPKI invalids. These are RPKI invalids announcements. So the intuition here, the hypothesis that we want to further test and validate is that actually RPKI, one of the benefits, is that it's enabling better visibility into BGP events, into BGP incidents. It's actually helping platforms that perform BGP incident detection and monitoring to do their job. Actually, to further emphasize this concept here, we plotted the red line, which represents the increase in RPKI raw deployment. As you can see, that correlates with the phenomenon that I was illustrating to you. So we found this very interesting. We'll keep digging into this, and we'll keep posted the community. Now, a few more points that I wanted to show you are related to misconfigurations. Earlier, I mentioned AES path prepending. I don't have the time to here demo a grip for you, but if you're curious about how our colleagues mess up sometimes AES path prepending configuration, you can go on the grip website and search, for example, for AES number 3, which is associated with MIT. It's the AES number of MIT. And you will find that apparently MIT is involved as a potential attacker in plenty of incidents, right? And in reality, I hear some of you laughing and some of you are smiling. As you know, these are just different operators making a mistake in their syntax, trying to set up AES path prepending, trying to prepend 3 times their autonomous system number in front of an announcement, in the path of an announcement. So GRIP recognizes these events as path prepending misconfigurations. So this was to give an example that actually we identify different types of misconfigurations, and we're trying to add more granularity and more information about the different characteristics of the misconfigurations. And one of the results that we found interesting while digging into this data is that actually the duration of different misconfigurations are largely different across the spectrum of all different misconfigurations, where actually path prepending is the champion with a median duration of only 15 minutes. So we can start speculating, and maybe there is a remediation within 15 minutes in most of the cases. Where on the opposite side, instead, fat finger of prefixes actually tend to last even more than 8 hours. So we found this data point interesting. Again, we are going to dig a little bit more into this. And then I wanted to conclude with a couple of positive points. Earlier, I mentioned that misconfigurations have been declining over these years. We can also discuss, maybe it's a topic for the panel, about why, if RPKI had an influence, or also more work from the community, more community coming together, working even more towards routing security. As you can see, this pattern is dominated by those prefix fat fingers, largely. But actually, we observe a decreasing, which largely decreased, right, over these years. But we actually observe also a decrease in AES path prepending mistakes, except for during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, where we heard stories that there was actually more traffic engineering happening, maybe more rushed, more stressful traffic engineering happening. So this could be an explanation for that bump. We're still working, caveat, on cleaning up our data, analyzing individual events, and so on. Now, I don't have much time left, so normally I would have mentioned also another project from our lab that is led by Professor Testart. We are looking into RPKI adoption, what will take us to go over that 50% that Doug has shown us. Spoiler alert, the ARIN region is behind. Some of the organizations that face most challenges appear to be smaller organizations and government and academic organizations. We'd be happy to hear about your story about challenges in RPKI. I think we will hear something during the panel. And with this, I conclude. There was a thanks slide, but it didn't appear. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alberto. And we are moving to the next section of our session. And as data suggests, it's like a positive development, I think we can say. But we're not done, definitely. And let me draw back to the title of the session, so the fostering continuous improvement. And we're going to talk what kind of other forces we can engage to keep our development this kind of steep part of this S-curve and as long as possible. So we're reaching 90%. And with that, let me invite Tony to talk about some work that he was involved regarding routing profile for the NIST cybersecurity framework. Please, Tony.
Sure. Thanks, Andre, and to the previous folks. So this is a bit of a, often a different direction, complementary, but separate from a specific technology like RPKI. So I'm here to talk about the cybersecurity framework profile for internet routing. So what is a cybersecurity framework? This is a concept, I guess, maybe be the right thing to call it, that was started by NIST, which is the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technologies. The goal of it is to manage cybersecurity and reduce cybersecurity risks, and it's really a taxonomy of high-level outcomes for an organization. And so it's guidance for your organization to get aligned to improve your cybersecurity posture broadly, to assess, understand, prioritize, and communicate. So what is the CSF not? It's not a checklist. It's not as simple as that. But this is text taken from their webpage. The CSF provides a series of outcomes to prioritize and but does not specify the actions for meeting those outcomes, the specifics, right? So the profile, that's the cybersecurity framework. The profile is where various industries and sectors have taken the framework to develop a profile that's specific to their context and how they apply it. So examples of these might be, say, the oil and gas industry, the smart grid, the financial sector, healthcare, satellite communication networks, all sorts of different things, places where cybersecurity is important. They may not be information technology companies, but still nonetheless important. Obviously, probably people remember the ransomware attack that shut down a U.S. oil pipeline, as I recall, recently. And obviously, healthcare has been target, municipal governments and so forth. So what's the CSF profile for internet routing? This is where the internet routing community, routing operations community, takes on board the what's put forth in the areas that are described in the cybersecurity framework, and tries to figure out how it applies, how each of them applies or doesn't, specifically to our context. So who started work on this? Some cable ISPs started it with convening under the auspices of Cable Labs, which is the National Cable Television Association, which I think has a different name now, but NCTA is still the acronym. I was involved, Miles as well, and we did a first public draft earlier this year in January timeframe, and that one was based on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 1.1, which was published several years ago. We knew there was an impending revision to the CSF framework that to move it to 2.0, and that came out earlier this year. And then we did another revision to adapt where we needed to for the slight differences that were in the CSF 2. So the second public draft was September. It was actually October 1st. It ended up being October 1st. I should have changed this. And so that's published, and you can find it, and I'll send out pointers to it. But now what? Okay, we think it needs more and broader review because there's a broader internet routing community than and perspectives that maybe weren't brought to bear, and so that's what we'd like to bring it to the awareness of all of you. And what's in it is basically, this is the core of the cybersecurity framework itself. It falls into these different buckets, and essentially some of the pieces of it are things like this. So I'm giving you some examples, right? Inventory, identify is one big bucket, and part of that, a sub bucket of that, is inventory your hardware. So what are the hardwares what are all your routers and switches? What are the devices? Hopefully, these are all things that you all are doing already, but it's more of a framework to organize your thinking on this topic, right? Similarly, software. What are the OS versions you're running? Are they perhaps having bugs? So when they have when they have bugs or need updating, where they are. Suppliers, those are not only the gear but all the code suppliers. They could be your DNS providers. They could be your RPKI validator software. All these things might fall into those buckets. It certainly depends on your context, but it's just a list of things to think about for your management, for your governance, basically. Vendors, right? Do you have support contracts with all these folks? Are the bills getting paid? Do you know who pays the bills? All those kind of things. I mean, it's sort of mundane, and hopefully it's all handled already by your organization. But it's a good discipline to bring it all together and make sure it's all taken care of. Identity management, obviously, credentials. Who's got authority to make changes on the network? How is that managed as people come and leave the organization or different roles in the organization? Similarly, for things like regional internet registry accounts. So we saw an issue, I'm trying to remember, it was several months ago. I don't know if it was in 2024 or last year. January. Okay. I knew somebody would know, where Orange Telecom is subsidiary in Spain. Apparently some of their credentials for the RIPE customer portal were compromised, and somebody went in and made a bunch of ROAs that rendered all their routes invalid, and it caused a big outage for them. So that's an example. So those are outside the internal authorization system of the company, but you want to make sure who are all the people who have access to those accounts. How is that managed and stuff if there's change within the company. Physical access. Okay, right. You want to make sure that there's this is your equipment's under lock and key. How's that managed? Also, if you're co-locating with someone, how's all that handled? Are those bills getting paid? Those kind of things. Then we come into another bucket, respond, like incident management. How do you? There's another one that's called detect, but similarly, once you detect something, how do you detect it? And then once you've detected it, how do you respond? Do you have response plans? For instance, Facebook had a big outage a few years ago, Meta, I guess, where there was a problem, a routing problem led to a cascading series of problems that included locking them out of their physical facilities and breaking all their internal communications. So it was a lot harder for them to respond. So trying to go ahead and imagine some of those scenarios and develop playbooks and try and run them, those are all part of good practice. And basically, so what we want to do is get more eyes on this, and I should have included a QR code or something so that people could find it. But if you Google routing security profile or CSF profile for internet routing, I think you'll find some of the information there. And let's talk to me afterwards if you'd like to get more involved in reviewing it, or if you see problems with it, and we'll work on revising it in the future and getting it to a better place. With that, I'd thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And Tony was talking about how to, integrate routing security in common cybersecurity frameworks, which might be important, especially if you talk about enterprises outside telecom industry where networking may not be their sort of area of expertise. I would like to talk about a slightly different aspect of routing security. As we know, that routing security on a global scale as an overall community goal has business case. Of course, we all want to have better routing security, but on individual level, it's sometimes not enough, right? So it's sometimes hard to articulate this business case. And I would like to talk, how can we improve, increase this, make the business case stronger? If you could put the slides up, please. Okay, great, thank you. All right, so I'll be talking about Menace Plus, and Menace Plus is not sort of a random name. It comes from the another initiative, well, not another initiative, but the base initiative, which is called Menace. And let me recap where it came from. It came from the understanding of this essential fundamental problem in routing, where no one entity can solve the routing security problem. Moreover, no one entity can secure routing for themselves. It always depends on the work or actions or inactions of other operators. And that is what's called in social science a collective action problem. So routing issue challenge is a good example of this collective action problem. One approach that was suggested 10 years ago and since grew for 10 years, it's called mutually agreed norm for routing security, and it suggests to mitigate this problem by installing a norm, right? By making community agreeing to baseline, which in Menace is called actions. But it's not just a paper or declaration. There is also a growing community of network operators that join this initiative and demonstrate their commitment to this baseline, which is a measured commitment as well. Anyway, so those are the benefits why network operators would like to join Menace. Of course, protecting own network, if you implement those actions, if you commit to this baseline, you streamline your operations, your customers stop being your sometimes transit providers by introducing the route leaks, and it's better for you. There is a business case for that, yes. I think social responsibility is there. It plays a lot of a big role here as well. Improving routing security on the global scale, just making the system better for all of us. And the third thing that we thought when Menace was launched is gaining competitive advantage by responding to customer demands. But this doesn't materialize really sort of strongly, and that's what we're focusing on in this effort called Menace Plus. Now, if you look at the internet, right, and this is CADA diagram of interconnected internet, where each dot is the autonomous system, it's like, how can we secure that sort of enormous system? How can we create any collective action for this number, like 75,000 or so autonomous systems? But the focus of Menace Plus is not on the core, it's not on the whole system, it's actually focused on the edge. And edge is 85% of all autonomous system operating in the internet. That's the enterprise. And if you look at the enterprise, their internet is much smaller. So if you look at the enterprise and major sort of traffic flows that go from there, where they are reaching to their digital assets, such as their cloud, their provider, business partner, the distance or diameter of this internet is actually quite small. It doesn't exceed maybe 2 hops. So this is a sizable problem to be resolved. So we did some sort of research, and we're not claiming scientific research, so my colleagues will probably excuse me. But we looked at possible paths from different sort of enterprises in different industries, their path towards their potential digital assets. And what we noticed, we looked at Australian banking, some of the enterprises there. So we noticed there that it's like 1 hop, it's just one. If you select your connectivity provider wisely, you're securing your path. Automotive industry, and here we looked at business-to-business relationship, and here you see 2 hops, but that means that if your partner and you wisely select connectivity provider, also your path is secured. Now, what is this path for enterprises? Well, in fact, this is nothing more and nothing less as supply chain. So for enterprises, I think it's also better understood the challenge of routing. It's not the challenge of routing per se, it's a challenge of securing your supply chain. So that is the premise of Manus Plus. So we're developing this framework for routing security, really focusing on this supply chain, really focusing on enterprise and their connectivity provider relationship. So the requirements apply to connectivity provider, right? And they include demands. They're based on the demands that are coming from sort of majority of enterprises as far as connectivity is concerned. It is also conditioned to be included in common cybersecurity frameworks. For instance, it can be referenced when it's completely ready from like routing security profile and some other frameworks. So it can be integrated naturally in the enterprise security organization. Those are things that we considered. We did a survey with enterprises, and they indicated their interest in different type of requirements or buckets of those requirements. And we went on and detailed those controls for those areas where enterprises think that's important for them. Those are 6 areas, which some of them can be recognized in Manus, but how Manus differs here is that the requirements are stronger, and also level of assurance, audit, this kind of stuff is higher. So the idea is that Manus Plus participant would be able to more credibly say that they implement or demonstrate that they implement all these controls. So 6 areas. We include something that goes just beyond routing, such as DDoS, such as security services. But that would seem to be very important for enterprise, and therefore we thought, and that when we say we, I should have said that, it's a working group within Manus. There are about 60 participants that are working on this and developing this set of controls. The current status, well, that's a working group. If you're interested, you can still join. We're meeting on Zoom monthly, but we also communicate on Slack. The control matrix is ready, but we're still testing and debugging this. I'm not going to go through this small font. I'm sure you can't read it. And that was not the intention. It's just to show you that's a real thing. What still needs to be done? I said it's high level of assurance, and in Manus there's some caveats with the measurement system. We actually monitor all the participants in Manus to estimate their level of commitment or their level of compliance, conformance to Manus requirements. But with the measurement framework, which is completely passive, there are some challenges. So with Manus Plus, we can't fully rely on this measurement framework, and we need to develop a more active measurement framework that will create higher level of assurance that they really implemented one of very important action as filtering, for instance. We also plan to test run the audit procedures with select group of operators. So we create a self-assessment and would like to get some feedback. Again, even if you're not participating in Manus Plus development, but you are interested and would like to play with this, please reach out to us, and we'll send you this self-assessment survey so you can test and provide some feedback how that works for you or how it doesn't. And with that, I'm done. Thank you very much. All right. Okay, and now we are moving to our second part, or the last part of our session, and we invite everyone to the panel. I'll do the questions, and the panel will do the answers. That's the game. And I would like to start. And we have the audience, of course. But again, I think it would be good if we discuss something and then we engage with the audience. And yeah, please prepare, think of your questions. So I would like to start addressing network operators that haven't spoken yet, right? But they're probably the most important part on this panel, and they're actually people who take action and improve routing security. So from your perspective, what is the biggest challenge in your work when we talk about routing security that you experience? And please think of things that are important for you, but also you think might be common for other operators. Please share this experience. Colleen, maybe I'll start with you.
So I think one of our biggest...
Yeah, I think it's on.
Oh, it was on. Okay.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I think one of our biggest challenges is customers and customer education. So we'll have customers come to us and say, do you do RPKI? And we're like, yes, but what do you mean by that? Because although we're doing validation, if customers don't have ROAs, that's not going to do them any good. So there's that aspect of it. Or we'll have a customer say, well, how come I don't have a ROA for my /27? Well, because it's a /27. So there are things like that my team will spend time talking to customers, educating. We're also happy to talk to anybody here who's thinking about implementing RPKI or ROV, are creating ROAs. We're happy to share our lessons learned there. But I think one of the biggest challenges is just communication and people understanding what do we mean by BGP security or routing security in general. So we spend a lot of time with customers that way.
Some of the other challenges we have, I have absolutely the same kinds of challenges that Colleen has, but we have a large and complex network with a long history of different kind of IP allocations. So we have a very diverse mixture of, what are we using for infrastructure? What are we using for our own services? What have we delegated to customers? And those things get mixed up quite a bit. So, having to disentangle a lot of things and really understand a really, really complex history of delegations and allocations so that you can effectively manage ROV or ROA publication. And that's really important to have that so that it can be integrated into your change management processes. Because if you don't have that in lockstep, your ROAs that are published really, really well synchronized with what you intend your routing to look like, then it's going to make it so that your routing doesn't look like what you want it to look like. So, and those are problems.
100%.
Yeah, I think I'm representing the smaller people, and I have exactly those same issues, that you need to have your routes and your ROAs aligned. In my part of the world, I don't feel like I've got enough resources to do automation to get this stuff right. You really want to automate it. And I don't feel like I have enough monitoring. It takes me too long to notice if something has gone sideways.
I have no problems. No, trying to keep pace with all the allocations and the customer provisioning, get inserted into the customer provisioning process the right way is a big thing. So train the provisioning and sales folks. That's a big one. And what was the other one? Is to educate customers on the value and the importance of if they bring their own address space, getting a ROA registered for it. We would like to get that to the point where that could be a requirement. Obviously, there's a lot of the issues that have been with legacy assignments and so forth are starting to get addressed by Aaron, or Aaron's done a lot of work to move that ball forward and get those addressed. So hopefully that shouldn't be a stumbling block to people as much as it may have been in the past.
And maybe I can follow up on what you sort of common theme here and ask a follow-up question. So those challenges, it seems like you overcame by yourself, or did you rely on partnership or help from other organizations? And if you did, I mean, what kind of critical organizations can you, or entities, or maybe some activity that you might consider important to this set of common problems, like what you said about customers, like what you said about, address space coming from different places and how to deal with that? Any thoughts on that?
So I'll say Manners was a huge partner with us. It's no secret that that the incident that Doug mentioned earlier was us in 2019. And we had already started talking to Manners about BGP security. And it was a long journey after that. That was a really bad day, but it got much better after that, right? We knew what we needed to do. We knew how we needed to do it. It just took a while. An organization our size, it took a little bit. Stay tuned for a NANOG talk about that. But I would say Manners was a huge partner. There are a lot of great tools out there. We used a lot of the open source tools. We looked at GRIP, BGP Alerter. I could name others that we have used, and then we pulled data and spent a lot of time analyzing data. And the people on this panel, like coming here to the community and talking to the community, talking to other people on this stage about how they were implementing RPKI, their tips. I mean, Nimrod's been doing ROV for a long time, since 2019, and getting tips and suggestions from them, talking to Job. We got a lot of support from the community too, and that was good.
I think I've had to partner a lot with a lot of internal organizations. AT&T being a really large entity, so part of my challenge with publishing more ROAs. I know we saw Doug's graphs. My numbers are down towards the bottom. Hopefully that's not going to be like that for very much longer. But one of the strategies I'm taking with that is approaching a lot of internal organizations and trying to get a lot of route aggregation done, so that we don't have to have as much hands-on management of what our external routing looks like. You can publish a ROA for a large aggregate block, and it just stays there, and you don't have to worry about it, because all of the more specific stay internal within my network. So that's been a lot of big challenge to get other organizations internally on board, and without actual real funded projects to do it, it is always an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, I would say the NOGs and recorded presentations and then interaction with individuals is what helped me, allowed me to do it without breaking too many things. But I would, strongly encourage that you do your own testing. I had thought that I timed things perfectly, that everyone else had worked out all the bugs and I could just press the easy button. I found a bug that made routers reboot spontaneously, which seemed suboptimal. And I received, looking glasses for a large transit provider exhibited behavior that I saw in my network that my routers were telling me that I had prefixes that were both valid and invalid simultaneously, which didn't seem right. And I got a fix for that. But I was surprised. Again, I only did this in the last 18 months or so.
I'll just add in that you know, beyond the cohort of operators and the operator community, the vendor community, the open source tools community, the registries, the people who are the watchers and the analyzers to give us the perspective, you know, like Doug and Alberto, who, you know, have a broader scope and access to much more data, and you know, finding the patterns and giving us the visibility to figure out, I mean, right, we can only see things from the inside, but we need to see things from the outside, because the outside are the people who, you know, trying to reach us. And so that's been invaluable to help, you know, keep us moving forward and figure out like where the problems still may lie.
It's great. So speaking of inside and outside, I mean, we saw this story, which I think success story, right? From the so how it's seen from the outside. Incidents go down, sort of, you know, we better understand more transparency in the routing system. From your operational perspective, do you see the same? Do you see sort of, you know, your operations becoming cleaner? You see less incidents affecting your networks. How does it look from the inside?
Absolutely. There's a lot of empirical evidence that says that this stuff really truly does work. I'm one of the prefixes that's been allocated to AT&T is a lovely block of addresses right next to RFC 1918 address space. And since there are operators, hopefully none of them are in this room, that don't speak CIDR very well, you know, those prefixes would probably every other week, at least, would get a hijack and get propagated out to the internet, and we have to go chase people down and, hey, could you please maybe not advertise my address space globally? That'd be great. And now that we have a row on it, and now that almost all of the large transit-free networks are enforcing ROV, I've seen maybe one of those hijacks every 3 or 4 months, and it's only seen by maybe 2 collectors, and I have the option to not care because it's on the other side of the universe from me, and my customers can still reach all of the things that they need to be able to reach. So this stuff, it just works. And so you can see that both on the inside from the perspective of not getting those alerts, I'm not seeing the impacts, and you know, it's just visible in all those route collectors.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know that I've had a significant problem in the past, but I definitely now have evidence that there's less hijacking going on. Just to be a wet blanket or something, though, this is a sharp tool. A network in my neighborhood created ROAs for their allocations with max prefix matching their allocations on a Friday afternoon, which dropped their customers off the interwebs, which was probably bad for the engineer who did that. But it worked great to drop the customers off the...
Unless you want to respond, but I have another sort of similar question. So it seems like, yeah, from both sides, it's success. It's getting better. That's great. So what can we learn from that? What can we learn from our success, and what should we beware of? And that's also a question for you as sort of outside watchers, as you were called.
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, we've talked about this. Many people I've talked with here, we've talked about, you know, one routing solution, security solution doesn't solve everything, right? We all know that RPKI only looks at the origin ASN. So there's a lot of other things that can happen. So that doesn't end and solve every problem, and that's what we have to keep reminding ourselves. There's more we can do. There's looking at the paths. There's more to do than just RPKI, which is a great start, but there's a lot more.
A lesson I would draw from this. I was just having this conversation maybe last week with Joe Snyder's. We were writing something together and just talking about this. This has been a multi-year, if not a decade, process or something. This is a long time. It made me think of this Bill Gates quote. I don't know. Maybe he never said it. It's one of these things. But it's people overestimate what they can get done in a year and underestimate what they can get done in 10 years. And I feel like that's kind of exemplifies these things. It took a long time. And these other remaining things of how do we address AS impersonation? That's going to be tricky. We really don't quite have a solution out in our hand right now, and this might take another 10 years until we've kind of got that problem to the point where so these things just take a long time. It requires persistent people kind of advocating, talking about it, events like this, but if you keep at it, you can make some progress over a long time. So hopefully we can learn from this. We were able to deploy. I think I look at RPKI ROV as a success story. It's still in flight, but you can do some sort of global security mechanism and have it be effective. Such a thing is possible. And so as we develop the next round of tools, just know that these things takes years, and but we should be not lose hope and keep working on it.
Yeah, well, you said years and decades. One thing that I think we touched on that is right now it seems there is a lot of attention to this area, right? Do you think this attention will last for a decade, or because it helps when there is a lot of attention, right? You can talk to your management, your peers understand the problem. There is focus. Do we have sort of sense of assurance that pressure or that environment will continue to exist for a decade? What's your?
This is a concern I've voiced with a few people. I think Andre's bringing this up, that it does. I mean, we've gotten the U.S. government interested, so that's a slow moving thing, and but then they'll eventually get interested in something else. And maybe right now we have to strike while the iron's hot. But I'm a little bit concerned that these incidents, like the one from 2019, I won't say who's involved, but those do help spur movement, and I think we're not having those anymore, and that's great. But then also we could be a victim of our own success, that we may make things good enough that it's hard to justify getting to the next step and addressing these next round of issues, unless there's these more determined adversary hijacks that are really catastrophic in some way. Anyway, it's something that's it's always in my mind of have we made this good enough that we lose momentum?
But on the other hand, I think just to poke at that a little bit, security just in general is a process, and we always have to reevaluate what we're doing and what are the risks and what are the costs of solving any particular problem, and it doesn't always have to be a perfect solution. Maybe good enough at some level is good enough, and yeah, until the next till the bad guy finds the next hole in the wall, then we're doing pretty well, and so maybe we don't have to solve all of the problems, but we are making a lot of really, really amazing progress on the things that we know that are there that are readily solvable.
Yeah, I mean, I think continuing to put energy into things like manners, things like having this panel is useful, because it's my belief that crypto is hard, and I don't think we have enough diverse and funded software for this whole ecosystem. Everyone noticed that we all use OpenSSH. People all noticed that we all use OpenSSL, and before bad things, really bad things happened, there wasn't good funding to keep those going. And I worry about the software in this area. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
Yeah, no, this is a great point. So, I mean, not only is those are examples of open source software that we're used to, but in a specifically routing security context, okay, if you're doing RPKI, ROV, route origin validation, you've got to be using a validator, relying party or validator software. Those are open source. There's just a few open source implementations of that. They are open source. They're also freely available. Those aren't necessarily the same thing, but that means that they don't have a necessarily ongoing business model. I know that at least RouteNator from NL Labs and RPKI Client with the OpenBSD project have ways, they have funding mechanisms like you can get a support contract. You can also make one-time contributions. They're charitable 501(c) type organizations. I encourage people to do that to ensure the sustaining, the sustenance of those projects and the viability of them. And likewise, with the measurement platforms, the collection platforms, like the route views and the ripe risks, and then the other higher layer analysis platforms that like GRIP and what's done there. So Alberto, you were talking about taking data that you'd collected over several years and rerunning an analysis. So right, the ability to do that and go back and see what's happening, and also then that can be used in building new solutions and figuring out like, okay, what's the magnitude of this problem over time, and if we're going to try and build a solution, a protocol enhancement or some other tactical thing, what's going to take the biggest bite out of the problem, right? And I think that's a big topic.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot of work to do there. It takes a lot of work to move from the layer of just collecting raw data, which is indispensable. And so projects definitely like route views, ripe risks, and so on, they should be supported as much as possible. But then there are multiple layers, as you were saying. GRIP builds on top of that and reports about incidents, but then digging and doing analysis and trying to understand really how that breakdown looks like, and trying to then describe phenomena and generating reports that might be useful to the community. That's additional work, and the funding is relatively small. So part of, I think where we can help is trying to create incentives or building more community. I feel I'm preaching to the choir, repeating things that we said, but I think everyone acknowledges that there is more momentum, and the community has come together in these years significantly. And when we say community, it's not just community building, it's not just operators, but it's operators working with vendors, with researchers, people who do measurements, people who build tools. There are more tools available now. There is more data available now. Yeah, I think we need to actually take advantage of the fact that there is a strong momentum right now, and work also on, while we are trying to tackle that remaining 50% of ROV, RPKI, ROV, start working also on beyond ROV. Yeah.
I think that's a great point. And I think it sometimes escapes sort of, the discussion when we talk about sort of practical things, that there is the whole ecosystem, right, that needs to be developed along, right? If some of those pieces are lagging behind, I think we'll all suffer in the end. So that's a very important point. Thank you for that.
And sorry, one point that I wanted to make about supporting these kind of efforts, like on our side, something that is really valuable to us is feedback from operators, the ability to validate events. We'll try to reach out more and to create more tools actually for you to also semi-automatically, manually, but make it easier, let's say, for you to provide feedback on events, to provide so-called ground truth. I wanted to highlight something. I talked about that 2% of attacks, of potential attacks that we detect. I am firmly convinced that 99% of the 2% is just misconfigurations. If we could tackle the 2% and reduce it so much that all is left is really more let's say, malicious events or serious incidents, that would be extremely precious to the community. And so feedback from the operators is very, very important to us. Sure, financial support, we operate on a shoestring. I'll never miss an opportunity to say that, but validation is very important.
Great point. I would like to circle back to what Colleen said, that while we are focusing now on part of the solution, right, and Nimrod as well, it's like the whole system, we need to a holistic approach to routing security, not just RPKI or ROV, although it seems that a lot of attention to those technologies, and understandably, those are great technologies and they have great impact, positive impact. But I would like to maybe again discuss in more depth. So what is in the ISP toolkit, right, and how that should be developed? Also looking further, like RPKI only solves part of the problem, right? In many cases, while we are not fully deployed 50%, still those 50% have to be solved with other tools and other solutions. So how you manage all this stuff and how you develop this?
One thing that I'll touch on that doesn't often get brought up in this. So on Monday, there was a talk by a guy, Bradley, I don't remember his last name. Ryan Bradbury. Sorry, my mistake. Who is from the Defense Department Inspector General Office, and talking about residential net proxies. So these are cases where people use residential IPs to commit cybercrime and different sorts of misbehavior, and some part of that we find also, since we are a residential IP, residential provider, sometimes people bring IP address blocks to us to originate for them. So they're not actually residential users at all, but they might look to the outside like they are, and they basically wash their bad acts through our reputation. And a lot of times these IP addresses have ROAs, so it's not an issue of that's straightforwardly addressable through that kind of technological enforcement. But there's something deeper, and I'm still trying to grapple with how to do it, and I'm interested in people's help and feedback. But there's this concept of know your customer, which is I'm learning about in the banking industry, to understand, like, because the banking industry and the financial industry are used for things like money laundering and so forth, like trying to understand, peel back, who is really behind the action, the customer sale that your sales team is making, and what are they doing? How can we get a better sense that they are legitimate entities, not up to no good? I don't know exactly a great way to do that, but I think this is something this could be some next steps for the community to come up with some practices to help with that. Open to thoughts.
Yeah, I have some thoughts. So we have policies about if a customer is going to connect to our network. We have a lot of enterprise customers, so I know you do too. And those customers, if they bring their own IP space, if you're big enough to bring your own IP space, you need your own ASN. Don't hide behind ours. You're responsible for your IPs, creating your ROAs. Don't try to hide your legitimate or not so legitimate activity in our ASN, because that's what customers will do. We have policies about whether or not we'll statically route your IPs. And if we give you IPs, then we require you still to do BGP with us, and we provide an ASN for you to use. We are really pushing hard to make all of our customers connect via another ASN, and that gives us another level of control and accountability, right? Because it's not just, if you saw the talk, everything that he was talking about, it's not just people trying to buy a bunch of sneakers. It's a lot of things but it also is, yeah, right. So there's that. We have policies in place about that. I think that's a big one. And to go to the next point, like other technical things we do, like simple things like making sure our filtering is correct and the prefix lists are correct. That's again about knowing your customer, right? So we have resellers. We have what other people would consider ISPs connecting to us, right? So we have to think about that. So these different layers of customers we have to understand. And we have provided training for the teams that do those implementations to give them some tips. Like if someone's really pushing you and they're like this sense of urgency, this must happen, or their 1 gig circuit they're going to turn down or whatever it is, then we've told them like that's a red flag. You need to think about that. So and they're really good. We've built a relationship with them, and so sometimes the social science aspect of it is a big tool in our toolkit.
Yeah, and those problems that you guys were just talking about, those are really they're not exactly routing security issues, but they definitely fall within the realm of what we do as a service provider, and they're not easy problems. But to kind of circle back to the routing control issues, there's a lot of really straightforward things to do. Knowing what makes sense in your network. If you're familiar with the concept of peer locking, it's a really, really simple, straightforward tool to use that you can build in existing technology and in your routing policies today. So, for example, I know that it makes absolutely no sense for me to receive a route with 701 in the AS path from any place other than my direct connections to AS 701. So default policy across every session, everywhere, I'm going to reject those flat out because it makes no sense. And so those are really simple things that you can do, whether you're transit free, whether you buy transit, whatever size network you are, you have to know what makes sense for your environment. And you can apply policies that block a lot of really stupid things from even existing.
Yeah, so I buy transit, so PureLock specifically maybe isn't so relevant to me, but implementing ROV doesn't mean that you can get rid of your existing mechanisms. So for me, IRR filtering, max prefix, and other sorts of filters where just stupid stuff shouldn't come in or leave your network.
I'd argue that PureLock actually can make sense for you because you buy transit, but you also have separate peering. So should you ever see your transit provider's AS coming from your peers?
Yeah, I think we had this conversation. And so yeah, I use a different mechanism
Right.
to avoid announcing stuff that shouldn't happen. But
receiving it.
yeah, receiving, I'm not sure it's worth the effort to me to put, but yeah.
Okay, well, we don't have much time, and I would like to carve out some time for questions from the audience. But maybe last question. I think common theme was that educated customers, getting their attention to those routing problems is a challenge, right? And of course, help me, help you, that doesn't work all the time. So do you think, and especially customers like enterprise customers that are outside our telecom, I mean, we get excited about ROV, RPKI, and they might not so responsive to those acronyms. So do you think that integrating routing security, elevating that in their sort of, common practices, the security practices they use, or in their procurement practices, or projecting routing security as supply chain security can help in sort of this education, in motivating them to do more?
So I think it would help. We have had customers that have come to us, and interestingly enough, if you went to any of the quantum talks earlier, they were concerned about the harvest now, decrypt later concept. And, is that really a threat? And, can our routes really be hijacked? And And so we did talk to them, and and out of that, they're like, oh, okay, we'll do this RPKI thing, because they came to us that way, which I thought was sort of a side door, but I was willing to take it.
But I think we're already seeing a lot of
Yeah.
that, definitely, because you know the terminology is out there in the press. The you know the FCC has been talking about it. The White House has been talking about it. There's a lot of stuff out there, and so we get these questions like, "Hey, I've heard about this RPKI thing. I want to make sure that you guys have that on my port to you." And right, so the answer is okay, but I don't think that does what you think it might do. So then we have to go and start and educate them on what it actually means. But they're asking about it absolutely, you know, and I'm not in tune so much with the sales portion of things, but you know, so I don't know if it's actually been showing up in RFPs or anything. But you know, if it isn't yet, it will soon. You know, probably regardless of your size. If you're gaining customers, then you know they're going to want to make sure that they're connecting to a secure environment. So, you know, we're definitely seeing that kind of those kinds of questions and adoption.
Yeah, I sort of expect the financial industry to start asking for this. Internet 2 did a great job with awareness inside their community. So customers I've got are the universities and the state networks that have been doing this now for a while. Caring about routing security is what I mean by this.
Okay, well, then I think that's time if you have any questions or prepared any questions. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this very interesting, in my opinion, very interesting pair. But are there any questions from the audience?
Routing security solved.
Well,
That's the impression you produce.
can we ask that? Who all, A, has ROAs and B, has implemented ROV?
Who has ROAs? Who has ROAs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
ROV? Okay. Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Dave Toonsen from the Amsterdam Internet Exchange. We have multiple internet exchanges around the world. And the other day I had a discussion with a customer of us that advertises prefixes to the route servers that we have, and we only propagate secure routes to other peers. So they have the problem that they have leased IPv4 address space, and they are not the owners of the prefixes. The problem is they have no option to actually create ROAs for those prefixes. Have you faced those situations before, and what could you advise doing that?
I tend to see if the only way that I end up usually knowing that there's a leasing company involved is because I see, you know, because I look at the RPKI data, and that's how I often see that sometimes the leasing company will create a ROA for the wrong thing, you know, due to the peculiarities of our network. But they've created a ROA, and I've seen it. So I know that some leasing companies will do it. I think that, you know, what I'd like to see is, you know, if you're getting leased addresses, you have to and if you're getting them from somebody who can't create a ROA, then get them from somewhere else. You know, and I think the market should be sorting it, really.
And I guess I didn't quite. I want to make sure I understood the issue. Are you not accepting unknown prefixes?
Well, the thing is, we install all of the received prefixes on our route servers. It depends on both sides of the peers, depending on which settings they allow for, which prefixes they also want to receive from the route servers. Most customers use the default settings, which involves only allowing RPKI valid prefixes to be received from the route servers. And specifically in this case, they have their reasons to only have leased IPv4 address space because of other limitations that they discussed back then.
Yeah. I guess the only thing I can say about that is generally it's not recommended to reject unknowns. It's certainly a decision that everyone here is entitled to make on your own networks. But so it's I don't really know how else to answer the question other than maybe maybe the customer may need to rethink that policy.
Yeah, I'm not sure that. Yeah, I'm confident that rejecting unknowns is a bad idea, at least for my address, my customer base right now. I mean, we have the data that would be dropping roughly half the V4 internet by address space, roughly 25% of the traffic. Okay? But your network, your rules.
Yeah. And then one follow up to that is that on an IX you're doing that's peering, so it's maybe a little bit. There's a little bit more leeway there. Certainly that would be a terrible idea on a transit connection.
Yeah, and by the way, just for the context, in the managed IXP, that's exactly the case, that people, well, they don't reject unknowns, but they fall back to IRR filtering, and it's all whitelist, sort of permit list, not, allow,
Sure.
not otherwise.
Did that answer? Yeah, thank you. That was it. Basically, the same suggestion that I had for them was also to try to sort out the situation with leasing and try to come up with another solution. Thanks for your insights also in this panel.
I mean, there are people, as Nimrod said, who do the leasing and actually work with the registered owner of the address space. Whoever has access to the RIR.
That's okay.
Pauline said it. Someone smarter than me said it already. So it is doable. Another example would be Amazon. Bring your own address requires that there be ROAs.
Thank you. I guess we have time for one more question.
Thank you.
Gary Geeson, eGate Networks. I'm curious on your view on whether, to one of the points made earlier, has all the default free zone implementing ROV, is that enough? Like for smaller operators and enterprises that kind of sit around the edge and gain less benefit from something like ROV, is it worth it in your view that, kind of all these many networks where there's, a lot more cumulative effort required and generally speaking, fewer resources to deploy and operate ROV. Is it, in your view, worthwhile for those operators and enterprises to do so, or should they sort of outsource that responsibility to their upstreams and peering route services and that type of thing, and focus on more core things like BCP38, or has ROV validators matured to the point where they're easy enough to deploy and operate that pretty much everyone should do it?
So that's, we may have different.
Probably have the same answer.
Well, so I think you bring up a great question, because I think that there are things that would be more effective depending where you sit in the ecosystem. So for example, our wireless ASN 6167 has 100% ROAs. Do we do ROV there? No, because we do ROV on AS701 and 6167 we control. So both of these we own, right? And we control, so we do ROV there so that they're never going to get invalid routes to 6167 because it's protected by the ROV that's done on 701. But we know that, we control that. So, and I think on a network like that, BCP38 makes a lot of sense. Does it make sense on our transit network? Maybe not as much. So I think that's an excellent point. Where you sit in the ecosystem makes a difference about what kinds of, where your best return on investment is. Because a lot of us actually do work for-profit companies. And so we have to prioritize our resources, no matter who we are, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit. Yeah,
I definitely think there's a diminishing return, kind of the farther out from the core that you go. I'm never going to tell you no, don't do it. If you want help, if you need help doing it, if we're everybody in the community is happy to help and do those things. Are you going to get a huge benefit from it? Depends on who your upstreams are. Do you want to trust your upstream to do that consistently and all those things? It can certainly be helpful, but I think it's kind of diminishing returns the further out you go. But where your resources make the most sense to apply.
Yeah, I would say your network best and what the first thing you should do is. Doug pointed out that we have at least one global transit provider that's not doing ROV. Maybe look at that, understand who your transit providers are. I was surprised that I got invalid prefixes from networks known to be doing ROV, but I think the ecosystem gets better and better, and you should prioritize what's important for your network.
And even within networks that do ROV, not all of them do ROV everywhere.
Yeah.
So
True.
I don't want to stop this discussion. That's great discussion, but we are running out of time and there is another session coming. I would like to thank all our panelists for this session, and I hope it was interesting, insightful. Thank you very much.